Hello and welcome to Daytime, your place for scary stories, straight from the horror forums of Reddit. Make sure to like and subscribe for more horror tales of things that go bumping the night. On tonight's episode, a young woman must escape from a maniac when she is abducted on her birthday. So, what would you wish for if it was your birthday? Because I wish I wasn't, trapped inside the birthday box.
I got a Game Boy for my 6th birthday. It was wrapped in a nice little white box with a red ribbon. It was from my out-of-state uncle, the only person who always got me something. My mother hadn't gotten me anything, but she told me we had some batteries out in the car trunk that I could use. Given how Game Boys chew through batteries, I figured I might as well stock up. So I got my Game Boy, crawled into the trunk of the car, and started looking for batteries. I found a whole bunch of them. Some used, some not. I ended up cozying up next to an old sleeping bag and playing my game right then and there. There was this strangely comforting smell of gasoline and freshly cut grass that lulled me into a gleeful comfort. I didn't want to be in the house anyway. It could get so dreary watching my mom sit by the kitchen table doing nothing. She was rarely, if ever, responsive. As I felt a few raindrops on my bare knees, I realized there were clouds brewing above. So I shut myself in the trunk, listening to the rain and playing my game. I had one of those flashlight extensions, so I could stay there forever. Except I couldn't. I hadn't realized that car trunks lock themselves when shut. I was stuck in there, and my mom wasn't helping me anytime soon. We lived in a small home in an isolated part of town, where most other houses were either abandoned or far off, so no one could hear me scream. Eventually, the batteries ran dry. Even the backups. And as the cheerful Wario Land theme music died, it was just me, stuck in the dark, flailing helplessly to get out. It took 18 hours before someone passing by could hear me. When I was finally let out, CPS took me away and placed me with my uncle. My mother, who was diagnosed with clinical apathy, has never really been a part of my life since. So as you can imagine, I have a bit of a complicated past when it comes to confined spaces and birthdays, but I still consider myself having a happy childhood. My uncle was amazing, and he cared for me more than my mother ever did. I did well in school, I made many friends, and I did well as a point guard on the high school basketball team. You don't have to be tall to be a good point guard. I moved up to Morgantown and got my master's in business administration from John Chambers College. Ever since, I've been working hard and staying out of trouble. I've made myself quite comfortable. Still don't celebrate my birthday, though. That brings up a lot of emotions. A few years ago, I got a letter informing me that my mother had passed. I was asked to come back home to Juniper to collect her things and sign the papers in person. So, one late September afternoon, I took a trip down memory lane to say goodbye to that chapter of my childhood, once and for all. But something didn't feel right. When I arrived later in the day, the house was in shambles. It had been abandoned for years. And there was no one there to greet me. It was just me, standing in an overgrown yard listening to the crickets waking up. A one-story home with every window broken, where the white paint had peeled so much it looked like the yard was covered in dandruff. Then, someone put a bag over my head. It all went black. When I woke up, I was in immediate discomfort. My muscles ached and my back was arched in an awkward fetal position. I had this terrible urge to stretch and straighten out, but I couldn't. I was confined. I could barely move. All I could feel was rough-hewn wood, and all I could smell was vinegar and dirt. It was so strong it made my eyes tear up. I didn't understand what was going on. I fought, twisted, pushed, and screamed. Neither the walls, the ceiling, or the floor gave an inch. I got splinters all over my arms and legs. It was so oppressively dark that I couldn't even see my hands. It was also getting warmer, and I didn't even realize I was hyperventilating until I heard my own breathing. I could feel the salt of my sweat dripping into my eyes and my clothes sticking to my skin, like wearing a nylon shirt in the rain. There were these wildly irrational, panicked thoughts that came to me all at once. But the first and foremost was the feeling that maybe I never got out of that car trunk all those years ago. Maybe all of this had been a hallucination. Maybe I was still that 6-year-old kid, trying to find my way out, dreaming of the world outside. Hell, maybe my Game Boy was still around. I snapped to attention. There were footsteps and they were coming closer. There was an echo. I was somewhere enclosed and spacious. Someone outside was walking on concrete.
Have I got a treat for you, birthday girl?
Rasped a whiskey-torn old voice.
Have I got a treat for you?
A man, possibly middle-aged, maybe older. I seized up as I slowly came to realize I'd been abducted. I couldn't think of a reason for someone to lock me in an actual box other than some terrible, nefarious purpose. 1,000 troubling thoughts passed through my mind at once. Everything from being sold to tortured. I held my breath.
I'm sure you'll enjoy this.
He continued.
I'm sure you will be pleased.
I don't know what I was thinking. I started hitting the walls, screaming to be let out. I screamed and begged and threatened and cried, and I was getting so frustrated I couldn't even hear him responding. The tears wouldn't stop. Finally, there was a loud bang. A hammer coming down on the box and something piercing my skin. He'd hammered a nail in to make a point, and it had been close enough to scrape my knee.
Don't be so emotional,
Said the man.
It would make things easier if you weren't so emotional.
I quieted down, but I couldn't slow my breathing. There wasn't enough air in the world to fill my lungs, it seemed. The man outside waited patiently, then left the room with a jaunty whistling.
Beautiful birthday girl.
He said as he left the room.
Beautiful, perfect birthday girl.
There was a loud chunk as a metal door slid shut. I thought back on that day where I'd been locked in that trunk. I thought about the smells and sensations. Gasoline and fresh-cut grass. Now, there was vinegar and musty wood. A bit of mold, perhaps. Wherever I was, it was old. I decided I needed to take control. There would be no one passing by to help me this time. I had to be proactive, even if everything in me screamed to just curl up into a ball and weep. I had to do something. I forced myself to map everything in my immediate environment, to figure out if there was something I could use. I slowed my breathing and carefully ran my hands across the surface of the box. I calculated that it was about 3 feet across and an almost perfect square. There was a slight gap in between some of the planks, but there was another layer of wood outside. It also seemed like the entire box had some sort of fabric wrapped around it, as I couldn't hear wood scraping whenever I shifted the box. It was a smooth fabric. Cotton, maybe? I also realized that I'd been out cold for at least 12 hours. My birthday had been a day off, so if he was congratulating me, I must have been out long enough for midnight to pass. You can get pretty far in 12 hours, so there was no way for me to know how far he'd taken me. My fingers brushed against something smooth. My Game Boy? No. My cell phone. I came to realize that I still had all my belongings. My car keys, my cell phone, my jacket. I took off my jacket and propped it up to relieve my back a bit. Then I got my cell phone out. The brightness blinded me. It took me several minutes just to adjust my eyes, and even then they were still getting watery. I wiped them over and over until I could finally see something. The battery was at about 34%. Not great, but serviceable. I dialed the emergency services immediately, but I couldn't get through. There was no signal, no internet connection. We were off the grid. Way off the grid. Maybe underground? I tried lying on my back to kick the wall out, but I just couldn't get enough momentum. The planks were rough, but I couldn't get them to buckle. The only side I wasn't entirely sure of was the floor. I tried standing and pushing myself upwards, but nothing moved. I closed my phone to save on battery and kept exploring the rigidity of the box. I was at it for more than an hour, just pushing myself against the planks. Still, nothing budged, but I refused to stop trying. I took a breather when I suddenly heard the door open again. It was pretty far off, and I could hear echoing footsteps coming my way. Someone coughing, clearing their throat. It sounded like he was smoking.
All right, birthday girl.
He sighed.
Time to get started.
There was a loud banging again, but not on my box. And something nearby, another wooden surface. Something across from me. Another box?
Let me know when you're ready.
He continued.
I'm right outside.
Ready for what? I yelled back. What are you talking about? There was no response. Instead, he just walked away, closing the large door behind him. Moments later, there was a scream. A young woman. It was muffled, but clear and close by. I shifted around in my box to come closer, only to realize our boxes were literally next to one another. There were two of us. Hello? I called out. Hello, who are you?
What's going on?
She called back.
Who are you?
We're trapped, I said. We're both trapped. I tried to explain to her what I knew. I had her confirm everything on her end, that she was also in a box, roughly 3 feet across, that she also had a phone, but no service or internet connection. We smelled the same things, saw the same things, and had both been taken suddenly and in the last 24 hours. I got so wrapped up in it that I barely remembered to ask anything about her as a person. Finally, she learned my name, and I came to know her as Lorette, or Lori for short. He came in to talk to me a couple of times. I sighed. He keeps calling me birthday girl.
Maybe he was, talking to me?
Said Lori.
It's my birthday.
Mine too, I said. That can't be a coincidence. It was eerie, but it didn't explain anything. We tried to find more commonalities. I was 28 at the time. Lori was 21. We were both women, but we had wildly different backgrounds. She had a family with 3 sisters and 2 brothers. I'd been alone with my uncle. She went to public school. I'd had a private tutor. My hair was black. Hers was brown. My eyes were brown. Hers were green. We had basically nothing in common except for our birthday. And it didn't lead us anywhere. We stayed in there for hours. At first, I'd felt that tinge of hope, knowing someone might help me, that we could help each other. But now it was growing increasingly clear that this just meant we were stuck together. 2 victims, rather than 1. Lori wasn't about to give up. While I'd resigned myself to preserving my energy, she was still in denial. She was kicking, punching, and pushing against the planks, hoping something would give way. Of course it didn't. But she stopped for a second.
There's something in the cracks.
She said.
Some, insulation. I got short nails, I can't.
I brought out my phone and checked. And yes, looking into the spaces between the planks, I could see some kind of white insulation. A piece of it was poking out just far enough for me to reach it. I pulled out strips from a towel, drenched in some sort of vinegar. I conveyed the information to Lori, who tried to make sense of it.
Maybe he's, covering up the smell?
She said.
If we die in here, vinegar can soak some of that up.
So we're in for the long haul. Days, maybe weeks.
Oh my God.
Lori started weeping. I could hear her rocking back and forth, her box shifting slightly. But there was another sound as she did. A rumbling. A deep, dark rumbling. I wrapped my jacket around me like a blanket. It was getting cold, and I had to preserve my energy. You get exhausted quicker in the cold. At some point, Lori and I were just leaning against our boxes back to back, talking about whatever came to mind. Whatever made us remember that we were in this together, and that we weren't alone. The man hadn't come back for several hours, but it might as well have been days. I talked about my uncle, my job, my mother, anything that crossed my thoughts. Lori told me about her cats, and how she was saving up for a college degree. We were just thinking out loud. And when the words ran dry, we fell quiet. I felt like I'd known her all my life.
There's no water.
Lori sighed.
Without water, we won't last long. I'm already thirsty.
Try not to think about it, I said. Try to think of something else. Like an itch.
Great. Now I'm itchy and thirsty.
She got a laugh out of me. An honest-to-God laugh. Suddenly, the door opened. Our laughter died, and the footsteps came closer. I heard a deep inhale, followed by a ripe cough. Definitely a smoker. He stopped just ahead of us, saying nothing. I decided to just wait and listen. There could be something out there. A hint.
You're not feeling up to it, birthday girl. You're not enjoying your present.
The raspy voice asked.
I'm sorry. I'll do better next time.
Lori couldn't help herself. I could hear her shifting in her box. I don't want anything from you. I want nothing, and you have to release me. I could hear the man turn around. I got the impression that he'd been facing away from us. Strange.
Excuse me.
He said, his voice shifting.
I wasn't talking to you.
Then listen to me, I said. She's right. You have to let us out. There was a loud bang against the side of the box. He kept hammering at it over and over again. Despite several layers of planks and insulation, the sound was deafening. I covered my ears, closed my eyes, and waited for it to be over. Seconds later, he was done. I could hear him panting and coughing.
Shut up!
He yelled.
Shut up! Shut up! Shut your pretty mouths when I'm talking to her!
A chill crawled up my spine. If he wasn't talking to either of us, there was someone else in the room. I could hear a groaning noise, like metal being bent from pressure. Then a thump. A big, fat footstep slapping against concrete. I held my breath, trying to paint a picture in my mind. I couldn't make anything of it. I'd never heard anything like it.
There we go, birthday girl.
The man said.
There we go. Nice and easy.
I could feel the pressure shift as something large came down, slamming into the box next to me. Something large that moved with great effort. But as Lori started screaming, it seemed to pick up speed. It got angry. Or excited. I could hear creaking wood and snapping nails as Lori's box was being torn open plank by plank. And the more she screamed, the angrier it seemed to get. The air shifted as her screams were flung high into the air. Both she and the box were hoisted at least 15, maybe 20 feet up. Her screams turned shrill as they bounced off the concrete walls. Planks breaking, fabrics torn. And now I could hear her terrified shriek as clear as day. She was out of the box. And whatever was on the other side made her cry like a cornered animal. There was a loud crunch, like massive teeth biting into a ripe apple. And Lori fell silent. I sat there, shaking. I tried not to breathe or imagine what was happening outside. I tried my best to be anywhere else. And for the first time in my life, I wished and begged to be back in the trunk of that car, playing my Game Boy. I could hear things falling against the concrete. Planks, nails, and something wet. Chunks.
There, birthday girl.
He shushed.
Aren't you gonna open your other gift?
Another groaning noise. More chunks falling from above. Bones breaking, splashes of liquid.
All right, I'll be back in a bit. Love you, birthday girl.
There was a kissing noise, followed by footsteps. Wet footsteps. And he whistled a jaunty tune all the way out the door. I had 3 minds inside my head at that moment. One mind wanted to scream and bash myself bloody against the walls. Another mind wanted to curl into a ball and cry. But in the back of my thoughts, there was a little mind left. It had grown there for years, festering from a wound back from when I was locked in that trunk as a kid. And that third mind was telling me to listen. It was telling me that no one was coming to save me. And it was telling me I had to keep trying. So I listened. There were still little things falling from above. But what I was just now realizing was that the floor seemed further down. There was either a hole next to me, or my box was elevated. I T-ried, shifting back and forth. The box barely moved. I decided on a direction and kept shifting that way, inch by inch, throwing myself against the side of the box. Finally, there was a stop. Some kind of threshold. That first mind was screaming at me to panic. to kick and scream. That other mind was telling me to give up, but that third mind just kept telling me to stay calm and to try. It could be a short drop that would just put me on the floor and change nothing. It could be a long drop, killing me. Or maybe something I couldn't even imagine. So I threw myself against the threshold, and I threw myself at it again. And again. This time the trunk would pop open. It had to. There was a slight shift as I felt the box clear the threshold, and as I pushed further, I could feel that there was no more ground to support me. The further I pushed, the more it gave way. I was balancing on an edge. I could feel it. I could lean back, staying upright. Or I could push forward and tip myself off a cliff. And while two voices were screaming at me to wait, it was that third voice that came through the loudest. And it was telling me to fall off that damn cliff. So I fell. The world turned on its head, and I felt my stomach rise to my throat. It all came to a stop with a violent crash, and I could feel the dimensions of the box shift. It was no longer a perfect square. Something was broken. I could feel one of the walls giving way. I started kicking. I kicked and kicked and kicked. Either my legs would give or the wall. And the way the planks were bending, I was betting it all on my legs holding for just a little longer. And suddenly there was a gap. Just a few inches, but I could see outside. I brought out my phone and used what little battery I had left to turn on the flashlight. I could see a concrete floor with splotches of blood. Further in, there was a chunk of flesh, or possibly skin. Broken planks littered the ground. With the wall of the box broken, the vinegar-soaked insulation gave way. There was a stench of blood so powerful I could taste the iron on my tongue. Moist, warm flesh. I tried not to think about it. I kept kicking. And as I did, the door opened again.
Was that you, birthday girl?
A voice called out.
Did you open your...
The footsteps stopped. Then he started running.
No!
He complained.
No, 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 no!
I kept kicking, and with one final push, the entire side of the box fell away. I could only see parts of him. He had a flashlight, but I couldn't see what he pointed it at. It was like looking at him through a wooden frame. A man in his 50s, malnourished, with sunken eyes and thinning hair hidden under a green baseball cap. But he didn't look at me. He looked at something in the center of the room. Something big and groaning.
I didn't open your present,
he said.
It broke. I'll get you another one.
There was a loud puff, like an exhale. The man shook his head and carefully stepped forward. He held his hands open in surrender.
I love you, birthday girl. I love you. It's your favorite, I made sure. They have that date you like.
He moved out of sight. There was a thump as something came down next to him. Something wet that stretched across the floor. Something pulsating, throbbing.
You want me to put the present in a new box?
He asked.
You want something else? Roast chicken? Sunflower seeds? I know you love the blue ones.
There was a sudden shift as something large moved. I could hear him fall to the floor, bowled over like a pigeon hit by a truck. There was a newfound fear in his voice. His flashlight disappeared, turning the room as dark as a grave.
Honey,
he wheezed.
I'll get you a new one. You'll get a new present. I'll...
Another thump, followed by a piercing shriek. Whatever was out there was making itself busy with my assailant. This was my chance. I crawled out of the box. I almost slipped on the blood, but I managed to steady myself. I didn't turn to look. I didn't do anything but to listen to all the little voices in my head, now in complete unison. Run. He begged her to stop. He screamed and pleaded, but nothing changed. I heard bones snapping and tendons tear. The sound of those big teeth biting into a ripe apple. And as his panic gave way to maddening acceptance, he started laughing. He laughed like I'd never heard anyone laugh before.
This day will be all yours but birthday girl. No one else can have your birthday. No one else. No one!
but I didn't stop, and I didn't look. And as his laughter came to a crunching stop, I burst through the metal door. I scrambled up a spiral staircase, and as I collapsed into an old, abandoned tobacco field, I made a 911 call so frantic I can't remember a word of what I said. As my phone finally died, I was left on my own. Only a single voice remained, whispering gently into the back of my mind. I made it. I made it out of the trunk. Well, that was a few years ago. I was the third kidnapping victim of this man, and I was the only one who made it out. You might have read about it. It wasn't too far from Greenbrier Valley. It was a big deal for about a week. I'm bringing this up now because the investigation has been in a standstill for years. They've determined that he acted alone and that he worked as a consultant at a local law office. He had access to a lot of confidential information. That's how he picked his victims. The first victim, which I never met, also shared our birthday. There's a lot of strange things going on surrounding this. They worked on the initial report for days, but when it was finalized, it barely said anything but nothing to report. Strange how it can take days of investigation to come to that conclusion, especially considering what they must have seen when they first entered that old storage cellar. The case is officially closed, but I know there's more to it. But for now, I'm just happy to be out of the trunk. For good.
Hello and welcome to Daytime, your place for scary stories straight from the horror forums of Reddit. Make sure to like and subscribe for more horror tales of things that go bumping the night. On tonight's episode, a man reflects on his time as a boy when a strange event occurred in his small town. So are you lactose intolerant? If so, you might be one of the lucky ones, because there can be no milk.
A few months ago, the civil township of Wanley, NC, was officially revoked. The area has had a dwindling population for decades, and with less than a dozen people living there as of this writing, the town has been absorbed into a neighboring area. For most people, this is a footnote. No one really knew about Wanley. Hell, even the post office got confused at times. But that town used to be something, and the people who came from there are as real as it gets. I was one of those people, and I want to tell the story of what happened. In the 90s, Wanley was the home to approximately 3,800 people. The main export was corrugated steel roofing sheets, produced by the Wanley Metalworking Roofing and Tiles. There were the 2 dairy farms, the Ansons and the Bows. We also had a small barley and wheat refinery, a high school, 2 large off-site admin offices, and one of those small-scale business incubators. Apart from that, there wasn't much to see in Wanley. Just this flat chunk of land amid a big pile of nothing. In those days, people were already leaving town. Businesses were split between Fayetteville and Roseboro. A lot of people figured that there was no point making big investment plans for a town that was bleeding out. Hell, even Wanley Metalworking considered relocating south to Wilmington, abandoning their namesake. But despite all that sour gloom, it wasn't industry decisions that caused the downfall of Wanley. I was 13 years old in 1993. I grew up with my mom Raniele, Ronnie for short, and my dad Morgan. My little brother Amos had the room right across the hall. He was just 10 years old at the time. It was the last month of middle school. The following autumn, I was supposed to study at Wanley High. But for all of primary school, we had to take a bus out of town. It took us about 25 minutes one way. Not too bad, but it singled us out. Us Wanley kids were a unit at that point, arriving and leaving in unison. It was a Friday afternoon in late May. I was on the school bus, on my way back home. There were these 2 kids in front of me who couldn't stop talking about their latest Super Nintendo game, Star Fox, I think. I'd zoned out their entire conversation, instead opting to stare out the window. When we got to the Wanley town sign, I noticed something strange. There was a man from the sheriff's office using a roller to add something to the sign. All I saw was the word "no." There were several police vehicles blocking the road into town. I recognized the faces of the officers, but I hadn't talked to them before. There weren't a lot of criminals in Wanley, and my family were all on the straight and narrow. Even my dad, who joked about being a bank robber, he wasn't. He was a corporate lawyer. The bus stopped, and so did the conversation. No more Star Fox. The double doors at the front of the bus whooshed open, and an older policeman stepped on board with his hands on his walkie-talkie. He looked at the driver and nodded, then turned to us.
Hey there, kids.
He said,
I'm Officer Gellin. We're not going to keep you here too long. We just need to have a little talk, if that's okay. Is that okay, kids?
There was a muttering, "Yes," coming from the Wanley Middle School children, myself included. Officer Gellin nodded, hiding a wide smile under a wild mustache.
All right, I'll be right back. Sir, would you accompany me outside for a sec?
The driver stepped outside with Officer Gellin. Meanwhile, the rest of us kept looking around, trying to see what was wrong. "Maybe there's an accident," said one of the younger kids. "Maybe someone got hurt." "I think there's a fire," said another. "Mom says we can't barbecue because of fire hazard." "Maybe there's a murderer," said the Star Fox kid. "And they found like heads and stuff." "Gross," I added. "You're gross." I looked back outside as the other kids started to squabble. It went from fire to accident to murderers to space aliens, then right back to talking Star Fox. Meanwhile, I stared off in the distance, and that in turn gave me an idea. I could see the back of the town sign from the rear window. I leaned back and looked out. The sign read, "You're now leaving Wanley." But there was a large white text added to it. "No milk." Before I got the chance to tell the other kids, Officer Gellin came back on board. The driver got back in his seat.
I had a very productive talk with Mr. Harley here, and he tells me that I've stumbled upon a particularly crafty and well-behaved group of students. Is he right about that? Is that what you are?
Of course we were. In unison, we agreed with Officer Gellin.
Well, in that case, you might be able to help me out. See, we're looking for a special something that we can't bring into town or people might get sick. And we wouldn't want anyone to get sick now, would we?
Of course not.
Then I hope you won't mind some of my officers checking your backpacks to make sure nothing bad snuck along, would you?
2 officers stepped on board as Gellin hurried outside to halt an approaching sedan. Someone was trying to get out of town, but was turned away. One by one, the officers had a short talk with us and went through our backpacks, our lunches specifically. When they got to the Star Fox kid just ahead of me, I heard them asking him a series of questions. What he'd been eating, how long ago, if he'd gone to the bathroom since. Strange questions. Turns out, he had chocolate milk as part of his lunch. The officer who asked clicked his walkie-talkie twice, some sort of discreet signal. When they got to me, I handed them my backpack.
Have you had anything to drink today?
He asked. "My mom made lemonade," I said.
That sounds great. Wish my mom made me some.
He smiled.
Anything to eat? Any cheese? Any milk?
"Just fish sticks and rice," I said, "and ketchup."
Doesn't sound too bad.
He rummaged through the backpack and seemed relieved not to find what he was looking for.
All right, looks like we're done. You have a good weekend now.
"You too." Once they'd gone through every backpack, they circled back to the Star Fox kid. They asked him to come along and said they had to ask a couple more questions. It was scary. He started crying, and they tried to encourage him every step of the way. They said they were going to call his parents, and everything was going to be fine, and I wasn't so sure. Once the bus started rolling, I looked back to see Officer Gellin in the rear window. He wasn't smiling at me. He had this grim look on his face, staring straight into the asphalt, motionless. There was a long line of cars being turned away. Some cars I recognized. Friend and neighbors looking to make a quick exit. The bus had to pull to the side at one point to let a fire truck pass. I got the impression that something big had happened, but no one was telling me what it was. The conversation had died down, and I had to fill the silence with my worries. There was no chatter to distract me. By the time we got to the bus stop, I saw all our parents lined up, my mom and dad included. Amos was also there. He'd taken an earlier bus and had been home since lunch. As I stepped off, my dad swept me up in his arms. Mom was crying.
"What did they do?"
Dad asked.
"Did they take anything? What did they ask you?"
Mom took me from him.
Give it a rest, Morgan.
She spat.
Let's go home.
Amos seemed disinterested, instead clutching a Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles comic that they'd bribed him with. There was a man in camouflage with an assault rifle walking up and down the street, asking people to disperse and return to their homes. Mom and Dad hurried back to the car, sticking me and Amos in the back. He went straight to reading his comic book, but I kept looking out the window. As we got back on the road, heading home, I noticed several strange signs. The most prominent one was on the window of a corner shop. No milk, by order of the National Guard. When we took the road by the Bowes Dairy Farm, I heard popping noises. Before I got the chance to ask, my dad intervened.
They're celebrating,
He said.
It's just fireworks.
We lived at the end of a street, next to a roundabout. We had 3 neighboring houses. 2 of them were elderly couples who rarely left their homes, and the last was another family with a teenage boy. We'd hung out a bit before he started high school, but we'd fallen out of touch in the last year or so. Still, I had fond memories of watching movies on their big screen TV and playing video games. I bet they had the new Star Fox game. As we turned the corner, the street was in chaos. The Masons were out on the lawn, arguing with 2 fire marshals. The other elderly couple, the Stevensons, were dragging bags to their car. The other family was nowhere to be seen, and their SUV wasn't in the driveway. Their front door was half open and the lock broken. There was a piece of white paper with red text nailed to the side of the door.
Just go to your room,
Dad said.
We'll talk over dinner.
But what's going on? I asked.
We'll talk about it later.
He insisted.
For now, I need you to stay in your rooms.
Amos looked up from his comic book.
Can I play Nintendo?
As long as you want, honey.
Mom smiled.
And tonight, there's no bedtime.
Amos looked up at me like we were going to Disneyland. It took him a moment to realize that he was the only one smiling, and he didn't understand why. To be fair, neither did I. We hurried inside. Amos and I ran upstairs and got to our rooms. Amos had been allowed to keep the Super Nintendo in his room, while I had a VCR. It was fair enough. He could play games, and I could watch movies. But I wasn't in the mood to watch anything. I had this sinking feeling that something was terribly wrong, and I kept looking out the window, hoping to see something. The Stevensons were arguing next to their car, and the Masons were being ushered back into their house. I could see smokestacks rising from the dairy farms and flashing lights from fire trucks going back and forth down Main Street. Every now and then, if I listened closely, I could hear popping noises. It didn't sound like fireworks. It sounded like gunshots. I'd only been in my room for a couple of minutes before I heard a careful tapping at the door. Amos stepped in with this haunted look on his face, his eyes wide and unblinking.
Can you help me with my science project?
He asked.
It's acting funny.
Amos had been working on a science project for school. It wasn't a big deal. He'd taken different kinds of milk and placed them in cups to see which ones went bad first. He usually checked it before he went to bed, making notes about changes over time.
Can you please look?
He asked.
It's really weird.
All right. For something to make Amos say please, it had to be something out of the ordinary. I walked across the hall to his room, catching a whiff of an argument downstairs. Mom had raised her voice. There was a certain pitch to it when she was worried about something. She wasn't holding back this time. It made me feel sorry for Dad. Half the time, it wasn't even him she was angry at. I followed Amos past the pause screen for Contra 3 and up to the window. He had the cups resting on a small metal tray with plastic wrapping. He stopped just ahead of it. I heard this noise, and he pointed at the cups, clutching his notebook.
I haven't opened it. Mom says it smells too much.
As I approached, I saw the cups rattle. Not much, but enough to make a noise. I could see the plastic wrap shaking. Looking into the cups, it took me a while to understand what I was looking at. At first I thought it was maggots, but it wasn't. It looked like something had coalesced at the bottom of each cup, and there were these tiny white strands shooting out of it, prodding the plastic for weaknesses. It sort of looked like an egg, in a way, with these inches-long strands that moved independently of one another. All of it milky white.
It keeps moving.
He said.
Look!
He stepped up to it and put his finger on top of the plastic. The strands in the cup immediately reacted, shooting straight up. It looked almost electric in a way.
Why does it do that?
He asked. Don't touch it, I said, and we gotta put it away.
Should we tell Mom?
I could hear them arguing downstairs and shook my head. We should throw it away, I said. Let's flush it. Amos protested all the way to the bathroom, but didn't want to make a fuss. I told him I'd take the blame, and he could go back to playing Contra. That seemed to do the trick. I placed the tray on the floor next to the toilet. I put on Mom's plastic cleaning gloves just in case. As I took off the plastic wrap, those little white strands shot out of the cup, aiming straight at my face. They were a lot longer than I'd suspected, just inches away from my face. I panicked and dropped the entire cups down the toilet with a squeal. Looking down, they squirmed and twisted back and forth, these white strands whipping back and forth, like worms in agony. They were so much longer than I'd anticipated, and I could feel them prodding against the plastic gloves. They were looking for the warmth of my skin. The tips were much sharper than anticipated, and almost poked a hole in my gloves. I flushed. After waiting a few seconds, I could still see some strands moving at the bottom of the bowl. I flushed again and again and again. Finally, when there was nothing left, I dumped half a bottle of toilet cleaner in, flushed again, and then waited. I must have sat there for 10 minutes, just watching the water. There was this tingle in my spine, like I'd escaped some great danger. The same kind of rush you'd get if you'd nearly stepped on a snake or seen a bear. I went back to my room and brought out a notebook. No milk, I wrote at the top. I tried to name all the places in town where there might be a lot of milk or milk-based products. The dairy farms were obvious, but there was also the high school cafeteria, the corner shop with the soft serve machine, and the convenience store. Since this was a town with several dairy farms, milk and cheese was sort of everywhere. I listed at least 24 locations where there might be a lot of dairy products. There was a loud banging on the front door downstairs. Amos and I rushed out of our rooms to see what was going on. From upstairs, I saw Dad open the door to a man in military uniform. Mom looked up the stairs.
Get back to your rooms,
she said.
We'll tell you when you can come out, all right?
Mom, what's going on?
Just play your games,
she said.
Wait there.
But Mom,
Rooms!
She yelled.
Now!
She wasn't messing around. Amos and I looked at one another and silently decided to stick together on this one. There was a discussion between my parents and the man at the door. Amos and I retreated back to my room. He tried reading, but he kept getting distracted.
You think it's bad?
He asked, putting down his comic book. Amos had always been a bit of a pain. Lots of pranks and scares, but this time was different. We weren't playing around. It was like a silent agreement. Yeah, I said, I think so.
Why? What's so bad?
I think there's something wrong with the milk.
But you flushed it, right?
Not just that milk, I said, all of it, all milk in town.
It's all gone bad?
Worse, I said, like real bad. What happened next was quick. I heard someone coming up the stairs, and in the next moment, my parents opened the door to my room. They asked us to remain calm. They asked us to be quiet. They asked us to come along, stay close, and don't ask any questions. On our way out, I saw the man in uniform stepping into our upstairs bathroom. Seconds later, he sprinted back out, yelling into his walkie-talkie. Mom and Dad hurried us downstairs. 3 other men rushed past us, up the stairs, dragging dirt and mud through the living room carpet on their way up. All in uniform, all armed with assault rifles. They left the front door open, and I could see at least 6 more people waiting outside. We got in our car, taking nothing with us except Amos's comic book. A man tapped the driver's seat window with his rifle, and my dad took off down the road.
We can't get out of town,
Mom said, keeping her voice low.
Morgan, they're testing women at the checkpoints.
Maybe it's for the better.
Dad said.
Who knows how this can affect you? You might need a vaccine.
You've seen what they did with the dairy cows. They take them out back, and then...
We are not cattle, Raniel. They're not putting people Ranny out to pasture.
Then where the hell are the goddamn Abernathys? Them being dragged off was just for fun? For show?
We're not having this discussion,
Dad said.
Not in front of the kids?
I'm almost in the 2nd trimester.
She whispered.
And God knows what they'll do if they...
Mom quieted down, holding a hand to her mouth. Dad looked at her with a mix of pity and frustration.
I feel strange, Morgan.
She continued.
And it's not like last time.
There's this big 4-way intersection in the middle of the downtown area. When we got to that point, the lights had turned red. There were these Military trucks going by, one by one, at least a dozen, covered in blue plastic tarps. Long after the lights turned green, the trucks were still going by. As the second to last truck was going by, there was this loud metal bang, and the entire truck started moving. For a moment, we all thought it was going to tip over. Two of the wheels were off the ground, tipped back down, and the driver leaned on the horn. From seemingly every corner of the street, armed men started shouting at us to move. I could see something moving under the tarp, something sharp poking and prodding against the plastic. I'd seen it before. Dad stepped on the gas, going the other way. I saw the high school gymnasium in the distance, lined with vehicles all along the street.
They told us to stay here.
Dad said,
Let's just hunker down and wait.
We'll be trapped.
We can leave at any time.
We can't go by foot. I don't like the look of those rifles.
You know they wouldn't.
They exchanged a glance, and the conversation stopped. Amos and I just kept our heads down. There were still popping sounds outside. They were closer now. Dad found a spot further down the street, and we made our way to the gymnasium. There were at least 100 people gathered outside. I picked up a few things from various discussions going around. For example, the armed men were from the National Guard. Most of them had shown up early that morning, probably minutes after I'd left for school. There was a lot of talk from a lot of people. A soldier explaining something about lactic acid bacteria to one of our science teachers. An old man complaining about how they took his freezer. A kid being scolded for not telling his mom he had a milkshake with his lunch. A farmhand looking distraught, saying something about the new cow feed used at the Anson farm, and how it was unfair for the Bows to get shut down. Bits and pieces of 100 different stories. But what struck me the most was a group of young women looking distraught. One of them kept repeating the same thing over and over to a soldier.
I'll never get rid of it.
She asked.
It's in there? For good?
We had to sign our names on the way in. Dad signed for the four of us. I barely recognized anyone. They'd set up green military cots, 2 by 2, with a basic footlocker for valuables and personal belongings. Dad weaved between aisles of cots, keeping me and Amos close. Mom was looking for the restroom.
When can we go back to the house?
Amos asked.
They're checking the pipes.
Dad said.
That can take a while.
Checking the pipes for what?
I don't know, but whatever it is, they're making sure we're okay.
A stone sunk into my stomach. Maybe what I'd flushed down the toilet had gotten stuck in the pipes somehow. Maybe that's what they saw. For the next few hours, we stayed put. They handed out a couple of basic dairy-free meals. Once every 2 hours, there were a couple of soldiers walking down the aisles, making sure everyone looked okay. But people were far from okay. I saw this one athletic guy shaking like a leaf, coughing into his hand over and over. It sounded awful, like his body was trying to push something out. When the patrol made their rounds, they took him outside. I didn't see him again. Mom was in the bathroom for a long time. At least an hour. When she got back, she had this slightly ashen complexion, like she hadn't slept for days. Dad was worried, but she kept telling him she was okay. Once it started to get dark, the patrol said they were closing down for the night. A curfew was in effect. Dad had all kinds of questions, but didn't want to start arguing with armed soldiers. I could tell he was holding back. Corporate lawyer or no, personal freedoms are a big sticking point to him. I remember this big clock over the scoreboard. If you managed to filter out the cries and the occasional scream, that clock was the only thing you could hear. And I could swear that the seconds were getting longer the more you listened to it. Mom and Dad shared a cot, while Amos and I got one each. Amos went out like a light, but I stayed up long after midnight. I couldn't help it. That damn clock kept me up. With the lights off, all I saw was the sharp shadows cast by the crescent moon creeping in through the cloud cover. As the screams and cries turned to sniffles and snores, I was left awake staring into the ceiling. I heard people whispering about megabacteria, something in the methane, the lactic acid, the gas lines. Nobody knew for sure. There was one guy who kept muttering about birds being the source, claiming it had rained feathers moments before. Shit hit the fan. There was this one drunk man by the exit who kept talking out loud to himself.
They dance like skinny little worms reaching for the stars.
Skinny little worms. just like I'd seen in my brother's science project. I'd been drifting in and out of sleep for 1 or 2 hours when I snapped to attention. I heard someone running past me and looked up to see Mom's side of the cot empty. Dad sat up, rubbing the sleep out of his eyes.
Ronnie?
He whispered. He noticed me looking his way.
You see where Mom went?
I shook my head. He got up and took me by the hand.
Let's go look.
We went down the aisles, hand in hand. It was eerie watching all these strangers sleeping around us, like nothing was going on. Even the drunk guy by the exit was out cold by now. I don't know if I was imagining things, but I had the mental image of those skinny little worms appearing. Sometimes, when I looked at the sleeping people, I imagined little shadows scurrying to hide. Something crawling out of a nose, an ear, a mouth. We walked past this one man who looked sick, who had a metal bucket next to his cot. I could hear little tapping movements at the bottom of it, as if something was struggling to reach out.
She might be in the bathroom,
Dad said.
Let's go look.
There were 2 patrolmen by the bleachers, smoking and telling stories. They kept passing a bottle back and forth. Dad kept his head down, making sure not to look them in the eye. We went through a short hallway and made it to the bathrooms. The power was still on, but all the lights were off, making the emergency exit sign the only thing to guide us. Dad was about to step inside the bathroom when I tugged on his sleeve. "That's for ladies, Dad," I said.
I'm sure they won't mind.
We stepped through the door. Moonlight was coming in from a frosted glass window, casting an eerie shadow across the floor. We split up and started knocking on the stalls. It was quiet. Dad had this worried look on his face.
Maybe you should step outside for this,
He said.
just for a while.
"Let's check," I said. "It'll be quick."
Wait, let's...
I opened one of the stalls. I barely saw anything. In the moonlight, I couldn't see much more than outlines. I saw a pair of still hands holding up a bloated belly, with these dancing little worms pushing their way out of the skin. Like a goddamn human garlic press. The tapping sound of 100 thin parasites looking for a new host. Some were just an inch long, others were as tall as an arm. One of them poked the nail on my thumb, but couldn't latch on. I saw chunks of hair strewn across the floor, a side effect of late-stage infection. A hand fell over my eyes, and I was dragged outside. When I looked up, I saw Dad. His entire body language had changed, like he was in pain. For a few seconds, all he did was stare at me. Then, there was a bang on the door, coming from the inside.
I need you to get your brother,
He said.
I need you to get your brother, and I need you to get to the car.
"But Dad, what?"
Here,
He handed me the car key.
I'm trusting you, and I need you to hurry.
"But what about..." Another bang on the door. Dad straightened his back and pushed it shut. I stepped back, feeling my pulse rise through my chest.
Go!
He yelled.
I'll meet you outside.
Running back out, some of the cloud cover had cleared outside. I started running down the aisles, trying to find my way back to Amos. It was difficult. Everything looked different in the dark. There was this woman who got out of her cot just a few feet ahead of me. She coughed, and this avalanche of worms trickled out of her mouth. They spilled onto her chest and scattered across the floor. She turned to me, chunks of hair coming off her scalp. She wheezed at me, her brown eyes tired from crying. She tried to say something, to call for help. But all I heard was that inhuman wheezing, as little white worms made their way across her chest. I don't know if I was the one who started it, but someone did. That first scream, that choir of screams as lives came crashing down. There were so many parasites, so many victims. Some who just felt funny and tried to sleep it off, waking to a nightmare. Others had tried keeping their sickness a secret. There were no patterns, no limits. Everyone was susceptible. Young, old, strong, frail. There were some with parasites coming out their stomachs, others through the ears, mouth, and nose. There was this one man who had them in his left eye. As they reached out to others for help, the parasites spilled from one person to the next, burrowing into their skin. I didn't find Amos. He found me. He kept telling me that a bad man had taken his comic book, and that he ran away looking for Dad and help. He asked 100 questions at once, but I just grabbed him and ran, clutching the car keys so hard that my hand cramped. We made our way to the exit, but there was a rush of people going in and out like a waterfall. Someone yelled, telling people to drop to the floor. 10 others screamed back, begging for help. Others just screeched like wounded animals trying to alert the flock of incoming danger. Amos ducked to the floor and I followed him. Then the gunshots started. We got out by crawling on all fours. One of the soldiers tripped over me, accidentally kicking me across the ribs. When we got outside, we stuck to the wall and we kept a low profile. Amos couldn't stop crying, but I just pulled him along. I could barely hear anything over my ringing ears and pounding pulse as gunshot after gunshot rang out behind us. We crawled our way through the flower beds, using the high school's blue sunflowers as cover. Most people were stuck inside. Some made their way out, filtering back into the military tents outside. Amos and I made our way back to the car. My fingers barely worked as I fumbled to open the door. When I finally did, I could see more people heading our way from down the road. I got the car open and pushed Amos into the back seat. I followed him, locking the doors from the inside. We curled into the leg space between the back and front seat, hugging each other tight as I hushed him. He couldn't stop crying. He had so many questions piling up that they were overflowing into a jumbled mess. Questions about Mom, about Dad, about the people outside, about the bad man who took his comic book. As the gunfire died down, people started pouring out. But they weren't just people anymore. One of them noticed our car. One of them spotted us inside. And after that first one came another and then another. In less than half an hour, there were so many of them, they were blocking all the windows. All I saw were silhouettes, and all I heard were wheezing noises. Bodies calling for help, begging, pressing themselves against the windows to get at us. Rattling coughs over and over, as something inhuman settled in their throats. I could only see parts of them as they banged on our windows. There was this one man smiling at me with little worms dancing between the gaps in his yellow teeth. He pressed himself against the passenger window, meeting my gaze.
Batman!
He groaned.
Batman! Help!
An eternity passed in the back of that car, and sometime during that eternity, the noises stopped. Maybe they moved on. Maybe they got shot. I don't know. But at some point, the sun broke through, and we were both okay. Panicked, but okay. There were soldiers outside, rounding up people from the gymnasium, and people from the tents. Some were sent back home after signing some documents. Others were asked to stay near their vehicles until further notice. And me? Well, I refused to open the door for anyone. Amos and I stayed in there for hours until we could feel the heat baking us. Then, the door opened. My dad had a spare set of keys. Seeing his familiar face outside the passenger side window was everything I needed to know that in some way we'd be okay. He'd locked himself in one of the stalls and kept quiet all night. Looking back at it, he and everyone else were forced to sign some kind of agreement. We were given a hefty compensation, and all we could say was that it was killer bacteria coming from one of the dairy farms, which in a sense was true, but it didn't tell the whole truth. And it took Dad years to build up the courage to tell me what really happened to Mom. 6 years, I think. Apparently she was pregnant, but the whole thing had been a bit touch and go. They didn't want to tell us until they were sure. She was just at the point where her body had started lactating. Milk protein just... I don't know. I can't shake the feeling that maybe it was her that I saw in that stall. Dad took the money and left town. He and so many others. Some moved in, encouraged by the sudden price drop. I guess that's how the town made it all the way to 2023. 176 people died in total, directly or indirectly. But what they don't tell you is that thousands were permanently scarred. Some of the girls who'd just entered puberty had to get sterilized, or they might risk another outbreak years down the line. They did some tests on me as well, but determined I was fine. Amos too. Guys are affected differently. I still have that bacteria in me in some capacity. While I can eat and drink dairy nowadays, there's that part of me that just can't bring myself to try. The thought of reliving any part of that day gives me this sickening feeling in the pit of my stomach. I feel my pulse rising just thinking about it. Seeing that white liquid fills me with the sense that there is so much moving around in it that I just can't see. If it hadn't been for what happened that day in 1993, I think Wanley would have been fine. But as it stands, I'm glad it's finally gone.